Rip Campbell worked the oil patch over the Colt's cylinder, turning it in the light from the window. The clicks of the action were the only sounds in the room, sharp notes in the thick afternoon heat. Dust motes danced in the yellow bars of sun that cut across the floorboards. Sheriff Thompson looked up from his paperwork. He pushed his spectacles up his nose, the steel frames leaving a red mark. "You'll wear the bluing right off that thing." Rip slotted the cylinder back into the frame. "It's seen worse." He spun the cylinder once, a low whir, then clicked it shut. "I suppose it has," Thompson said. He leaned back, his chair groaning a complaint. He was a man made of soft angles, his face a map of pleasant creases. The star pinned to his vest was polished, but the vest itself was worn thin. "One more year, Rip. 365 days of this, then I'm going to sit on a porch and watch my wife's tomatoes grow." Rip holstered the peacemaker. He did not say anything. He looked out the window at Redemption's main street. Two horses stood hitched to a rail, tails switching at flies. A dog slept in the shade of the general store's awning. He saw Mrs. Gable sweep her porch, raising a cloud of dust that hung in the still air. "You think about it?" Thompson asked. "The porch, I mean." "Not my wife's tomatoes. I've had porches," Rip said. The office door opened and the scent of coal smoke and sweat came in with Jebediah, the blacksmith. He held his leather apron in one hand, twisting it. He was a mountain of a man who seemed to have trouble fitting his own voice. "Sheriff, Rip, Jeb," Thompson said, his chair groaning again as he sat forward. "Don't tell me Delilah kicked a post out again." "Worse," Jebediah said. "It's the Miller boys. At my scrap pile again." Took a length of chain and 3 horseshoes. Rip looked at the blacksmith. The man's hands could bend iron, but he stood in the doorway like a kid caught with his hand in the jar. "You talked to their father?" Thompson asked. "Abel Miller? Talking to him is like talking to a fence post. Except the fence posts don't smell of corn liquor." Rip pushed himself off the wall he leaned against. "I'll walk over." "They ain't bad boys," Jebediah said, his voice dropping. "Just wild. No mother to speak of." "I'll get your chain back, Jeb," Rip said. He took his hat from the peg by the door. The felt was stained dark with sweat. He stepped out into the heat. The sun was a hammer. He walked past the saloon, heard the tinny sound of a piano. He did not look in. He knew who was in there. The same men who were in there yesterday. He walked past the mercantile, nodding at Mr. Henderson, who sat in a rocker, fanning himself with a newspaper. The Miller place was a shack leaning against the side of a hill at the edge of town. A hound with more ribs than fur lifted its head and gave a single tired bark. Abel Miller sat on the porch, a jug resting by his boot. He watched Rip approach, his eyes narrowed. Rip stopped at the bottom of the 3 steps. He did not look at the father. He looked past him, at the 2 boys who peered from behind a torn screen door. They were thin and wore dirt for clothes. "Jebediah is missing some chain," Rip said. His voice was level. It carried no heat. Abel Miller spat a brown stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Boys find things." "They didn't find it," Rip said. "They took it, and 3 shoes. What's it to you?" Rip looked at the man now. His eyes were the color of a washed-out sky. "The sheriff asked me to get it back." One of the boys, the older one, pushed the screen door open and stepped out. He held the chain. It was coiled in his small hands. He looked at the ground. "We was just playin'," the boy mumbled. Rip held out his hand. The boy came down the steps and placed the chain in it. It was heavy. "The shoes," Rip said. The boy went back inside, then came out with 3 iron horseshoes. He put them in Rip's other hand. "Go on now," Rip said to the boy. The boy scurried back inside. Rip looked at Abel Miller one last time, then turned and walked away. He did not hear the man say a word. He heard the hound flop back into the dust. When he got back to the office, the chain and shoes made a heavy clank on Thompson's desk. "Abel say anything?" the sheriff asked. "He was there," Rip said. He went back to the window. The sun was lower, painting the edges of the clouds orange. Thompson sighed. He ran a hand over his bald head. "I hate that part of it. The kids." Rip watched a wagon roll into town, loaded with supplies for the mercantile. The driver waved. Rip did not wave back. "This town," Thompson said, more to himself than to Rip, "it's balanced on a pinhead. One good shove is all it would take." Rip kept his eyes on the street. "It's had its shoves." "And it's had you," Thompson said. "I don't forget that." Rip turned from the window. The light caught the scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his hairline, a white line on tanned skin. He picked up the oil rag from the desk. "Someone's got to clean the guns," Rip said. The next day the heat broke. A thin sheet of gray cloud slid over the sun and a breeze kicked dust up from the street. Rip sat on the bench outside the sheriff's office, whittling a piece of pine. The wood shavings fell around his boots. He watched a pair of black horses pull a carriage down the street. They were not trail horses. They were big animals, coats gleaming like polished coal. The carriage they pulled was just as black, its lacquered panels reflecting the dull sky. It rolled on clean, spoked wheels, making almost no sound. It stopped in front of the Red Dog Saloon. Sheriff Thompson came out of the office and stood next to Rip. He squinted at the carriage. "That ain't the stage," Thompson said. The driver, a man in a gray duster, stepped down and opened the carriage door. The man who emerged did not belong in Redemption. He wore a black suit of Eastern cut, a white shirt, and a string tie. His boots were shined. He stood for a moment and looked up and down the street, his eyes missing nothing. He was not a big man, but he held himself like one. "Looks like money," Thompson said under his breath. "Money buys things," Rip said. He kept his eyes on the man. The man, Hallerhorn, walked into the saloon. The piano music from inside stopped. It did not start again. Rip put his knife away and folded his hands over his knee. Thompson chewed on his lip. They waited. 10 minutes passed. Maybe more. The saloon doors swung open and Hallerhorn came out. He was followed by Silas Croft, the man who owned the Red Dog. Silas was sweating. He wiped his face with a red handkerchief and nodded at whatever Hallerhorn said to him. Hallerhorn's face showed nothing. He put a hand on Silas's shoulder, a gesture that looked less like friendship and more like ownership. They shook hands. Silas went back inside. Hallerhorn looked across the street, his gaze landing on the sheriff's office. He saw Rip and Thompson watching him. He gave a small, slow nod, a king acknowledging his subjects. Then he walked across the street, his steps measured, deliberate. He did not go to the hotel. He went into the freight office. "A man buys a saloon before lunch," Thompson said. "He's either thirsty or he plans on staying a while." "He doesn't look thirsty," Rip said. They sat. The breeze died. The town was quiet, too quiet. Jebediah came out of the smithy, wiping his hands on a rag, and stared at the carriage. Henderson stopped rocking on the porch of the mercantile. Even the dog sleeping under the awning seemed to sense the change. Hallerhorn came out of the freight office. Frank Miller, who ran the freight line, stood in the doorway. Frank looked like a man who had just been told his house was on fire. Hallerhorn said something to his driver, who nodded and climbed back onto the carriage seat. Instead of getting back in the carriage, Hallerhorn walked toward the sheriff's office. He stopped in front of Rip and Thompson. Up close, his eyes were the color of wet slate. He smelled of cigars and clean linen. "Sheriff," Hallerhorn said. His voice was smooth, like stones in a river. "That's me," Thompson said. He stood up a little straighter. "My name is Bill Hallerhorn. I'll be a new resident of your town." He did not offer a hand. "Welcome to Redemption," Thompson said. The words sounded hollow. Hallerhorn's eyes shifted to Rip. He looked at the star on Rip's vest, then at the butt of his Colt, then at the scar on his face. The look was an appraisal. "And you are?" "Deputy Campbell," Rip said. "I see," Hallerhorn said. "I'm a man who believes in progress, Sheriff. In potential. This town has potential. We like it the way it is," Thompson said. A thin smile touched Hallerhorn's lips. It did not reach his eyes. "Things change. It's the way of the world." He looked back toward his carriage. "I'll be at the hotel, should you need me. Though I suspect I'll be the one finding you." He turned and walked away. He got into the black carriage. The driver clucked to the horses, and the carriage rolled silently toward the hotel at the end of the street. Rip watched it go. He picked up his piece of pine and his knife. He started shaving a long, thin curl from the wood. "Balanced on a pinhead," Thompson said, his voice barely a whisper. "And I think somebody just gave it a shove." 3 days later, the sign on the Red Dog Saloon came down. Two men Rip had never seen before pried the weathered wood from the facade. They worked without speaking. A new sign went up. It was painted black with gold letters that caught the weak sunlight. It said, "The Golden Spur." From his office window, Thompson watched them work. "Golden Spur," he said, the name tasting wrong in his mouth. "Sounds like a whorehouse in Denver." Rip leaned against the doorframe, cleaning his fingernails with the tip of his knife. He paid for the sign. He can call it what he wants. It ain't just the sign, Rip. You see the men he's got working for him? Thompson gestured with his chin toward the street. Besides the two on the ladder, 3 others stood near the black carriage, which was parked permanently in front of the saloon now. They were quiet men in dusty town clothes, but their coats hung in a way that suggested iron underneath. They don't look like they're here to paint. No, Rip said. He closed his knife and slipped it into his pocket. I'm getting a beer. Thompson shook his head. Silas Croft is gone. Took his family and left yesterday. Didn't say goodbye to anyone. Rip put on his hat. Still thirsty, he walked across the street. The dust settled around his boots. The 3 men by the carriage watched him. They did not move. Their eyes followed him as he pushed through the batwing doors. The place was different. The smell of stale beer and sweat was gone, replaced by the scent of new lumber and varnish. The floor was swept clean of sawdust. New tables and chairs stood in neat rows. Behind the bar, a long mirror reflected the room, making it seem bigger, emptier. The bartender was a stranger, a man with a thick neck and a white apron tied clean around his waist. Rip was the only customer. He walked to the bar. Beer, he said. The bartender took a clean glass from a shelf. He drew the beer and slid it across the polished wood. The foam settled. 2 bits. Rip put a coin on the bar. He drank. The beer was cold, colder than Silas ever served it. In the back corner, at a round table, Bill Hallerhorn sat playing cards with the man in the gray duster, his driver. Hallerhorn looked up and saw Rip in the mirror. Deputy, Hallerhorn called out. His voice was calm, inviting. Join us. Rip picked up his glass and walked over. He did not sit. The man in the gray duster looked at Rip, his face a blank mask, then returned his attention to his cards. I don't play, Rip said. A man should have a vice or two, Hallerhorn said. He laid down a card. Keeps him honest. I'm making some changes, for the better. A town needs to look forward, not back. Some folks like looking back, Rip said. Hallerhorn smiled that thin smile again. The past is a comfortable place. It's also a grave. I'm offering this town a future. Jobs. Order. A man like you could have a place in it. A man with your talents. I have a place. You have a job, deputy. A job serving a man who is counting the days until he can walk away from it. Hallerhorn leaned forward. I'm talking about a position. Security chief. You'd answer to me. The pay would be considerable. Rip finished his beer. He set the empty glass on the table. The sheriff signs my checks. For now, Hallerhorn said. He picked up his cards and fanned them out. He looked at Rip, his slate-colored eyes holding no warmth. Think about it. The future has a way of arriving, whether you're ready for it or not. Rip turned and walked out of the saloon. The 3 men by the carriage were still there. As he stepped onto the boardwalk, he saw a wagon at the far end of the street, heading out of town. It was piled high with furniture. Frank Miller sat on the driver's seat. His wife sat beside him, a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. Frank saw Rip. He looked away first, and slapped the reins against the backs of his mules. The next week, Henderson sold the mercantile. Rip and Thompson watched from the bench. It was the same as before. Bill Hallerhorn stood on the boardwalk, talking in that low, steady voice. Henderson, a man whose sweat had stained the floorboards of that store for 20 years, twisted the brim of his hat in his hands. He nodded. He looked small. They shook hands. Hallerhorn owned another piece of the town. There it goes, Thompson said. He ran a hand over his mouth. Lock, stock, and cracker barrel. Henderson held out longer than Croft, Rip said. For what? Another $50? Thompson spat into the dust. A man builds a place, it ought to mean something. It shouldn't have a price on it like a side of beef. Everything has a price, Rip said, watching Hallerhorn walk away from Henderson, leaving the man standing alone on the porch of a store that was no longer his. The afternoon stage brought 4 more men. They were not drummers or miners. They carried their belongings in worn carpetbags and wore coats that were too heavy for the weather. They had the same look as the others. They looked patient. They looked dangerous. They walked off the stage and went straight into the Golden Spur. The town felt smaller. The quiet spaces were filling up with Hallerhorn's men. They did not drink much, they did not start trouble. They just sat in the saloon or on the hotel porch, and they watched. Later, Jebediah the blacksmith came to the office. He held his hammer in his hand, a habit he could not shake. He stopped at the doorway, his large frame blocking the light. "Sheriff," he said. "A word." "Come on in, Jebediah," Thompson said. Jebediah stayed where he was. "Hallerhorn's man, the one in the duster, he came by the smithy. Put in an order." "What kind of order?" Rip asked from his chair in the corner. "Bars, 10 sets of window bars for the hotel." "Said they were for improvements." Jebediah looked from Thompson to Rip. Who's he expecting to keep out? Thompson had no answer. He just shook his head. Jebediah grunted, turned, and walked back toward the heat and noise of his forge. That night, Rip made his rounds. The air was cool and carried the smell of coal smoke and horses. The houses were dark. The only real light on the street came from the Golden Spur. Lamplight spilled from its windows, painting yellow squares on the dust. The piano music was faster, more intricate than the simple tunes Silas Croft's man used to play. As Rip passed, the batwing doors flew open. 2 of Hallerhorn's men pushed a cowboy out onto the boardwalk. The cowboy stumbled and fell. He was young, his face flushed with whiskey. "You've had enough," one of the men said. His voice was flat. It was not a suggestion. The young cowboy looked up, his pride stung. "The hell I have." He tried to get up. The second man put a boot on his chest and held him down. It was a simple, easy movement. "Go sleep it off," the man said. He took his boot away. The cowboy lay there for a moment, the fight gone out of him. He got to his feet, brushed the dust from his shirt, and staggered off into the dark. The 2 men looked over and saw Rip. He stood 20 feet away, his hands at his sides. One of them was the driver in the gray duster. He gave Rip a nod. It was a nod between professionals. It said, "We have this under control." Rip said nothing. He continued his walk. He found Thompson still in the office, a bottle of rye on the desk. A quarter of it was gone. Thompson rarely drank in the office. "He offered to buy my house," Thompson said without looking up. Rip stopped. He leaned against the doorjamb. "Came by this evening. Said he heard I was retiring soon. Said I need a nest egg." Thompson poured another finger of whiskey into his cup. Called it a gesture of goodwill. He looked up at Rip. The lines on his face seemed deeper in the lamplight. "He's not breaking the law, is he? He's just buying things. Paying fair market value. He's buying the town," Rip said. "What do we do?" Thompson asked. The question was quiet, almost a whisper. "We're the law. But how do you arrest a man for holding a pen and a bank book?" Rip looked past him out the window. The Golden Spur glowed in the dark, a bright new star in the center of redemption's sky. He did not have an answer. The next morning, Thompson did not touch the whiskey bottle. He sat at his desk and stared at the paperwork he had been ignoring for a month. Warrants from other counties. Reports on stray cattle. He moved the papers from one pile to another. The office was silent except for the rustle of dry paper and the buzz of a fly hitting the window pane. Rip stood in the doorway, watching the street. Jebediah's hammer rang against steel. A wagon loaded with lumber rumbled past, heading for the hotel. Hallerhorn's improvements. Thompson stood up. He took his gun belt from the hook on the wall and buckled it on. He did it slowly, pulling the leather tight. It was a deliberate act. He had not worn the gun belt in the office for years. "Where are you going?" Rip asked. "To deliver a message," Thompson said. He put on his hat and walked out the door. Rip followed him. The town was awake. People moved along the boardwalks, their eyes down. They saw Thompson and Rip cross the street, and they stopped to watch. A silence fell over the main street. Even Jebediah's hammer went quiet. Hallerhorn sat at a small table on the hotel porch. A pot of coffee and a clean cup were in front of him. His man in the gray duster stood near the door, his hands clasped behind his back. Hallerhorn watched Thompson approach, his face showing no surprise. He looked like a man who had been expecting company. Thompson stopped at the bottom of the steps. He put his hands on his hips. He did not look at the man in the duster. He looked at Hallerhorn. "Mr. Hallerhorn," Thompson said. His voice was steady, carrying in the still air. Hallerhorn picked up the coffee pot and poured himself a cup. The black liquid steamed. "Sheriff, come for a cup? It's a better brew than you'll find anywhere else in this town." "I'm not thirsty," Thompson said. "I came to talk about your offer. The one you made for my house." Hallerhorn took a sip of coffee. He placed the cup back in the saucer. "A generous offer, I believe. One that would see you comfortable in your retirement." "My retirement is a year away," Thompson said. "And the house isn't for sale." "Not for your price." Not for any price. Hallerhorn's thin smile appeared. He looked past Thompson at the small crowd that had gathered. He saw Jebediah standing in the doorway of the smithy, Henderson on the porch of his old store. A man of sentiment. I can appreciate that. But sentiment doesn't patch a leaky roof, Sheriff. Progress does. I like my roof, Thompson said. I like my town. The way it was, Hallerhorn said, emphasizing the word. The past, Sheriff. A place for old men and memories. I am building a future here. I suggest you decide which side of it you want to be on. The man in the gray duster shifted his weight. His hand moved an inch closer to the coat button over his gun. Rip saw the movement. He took a half step to his right, away from Thompson, his own coat unbuttoned. Thompson did not back down. He took a step up, his boot landing on the bottom plank of the porch stairs. There's only one side, it's the side of the law, my law. In my town. You remember that? He held Hallerhorn's gaze for a long moment. Hallerhorn's smile faded. His eyes were cold chips of slate. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Not in agreement. In acknowledgement. Thompson turned his back on him and walked away. The crowd on the street parted for him. Rip fell in step beside him. They crossed the street and went back to the office. Thompson sat down at his desk. He took off the gun belt and hung it back on the hook. His hands were shaking. He clasped them together on the desk until they were still. Rip stood at the window. Hallerhorn was still on the porch, watching them. The man in the duster said something to him. Hallerhorn shook his head and took another sip of coffee. Well, Thompson said to the quiet room. I guess that's that. Rip looked at the old man, at the set of his jaw. No, Rip said. I figure it's just the start. 2 days passed. Hallerhorn stayed at the hotel. His men stayed at the saloon. The town held its breath. On the third day, a rider came from the east. His horse was a bay gelding, ridden hard, its flanks dark with sweat and streaked with dust. The man on its back was small and weathered, a rancher by the look of his clothes and the worry etched into his face. He pulled the horse to a stop in front of the sheriff's office and slid from the saddle before the animal had stopped moving. He stumbled into the office. Sheriff Thompson? Thompson looked up from cleaning his peacemaker. I'm Thompson. Cletus Hayes. I got a spread about 10 miles out. The double H's twisted his hat in his hands. I need the law. Rip leaned forward in his chair. What kind of trouble? Hallerhorn's men, 2 of them, they rode out yesterday. Sad Mr. Hallerhorn was expanding his interests. Made me an offer on my land. An offer you refused, Rip said. It was not a question. Hayes nodded. I told them the double H ain't for sale. My pa started that ranch. I aim to finish it. He took a shaky breath. They came back this morning, just before dawn. They didn't come to talk. They shot my dog, poured kerosene on my hay barn and lit it up. Said the next offer would be my last. Thompson laid his pistol on the desk. He stood up. The look on his face was one Rip had not seen in a long time. It was the look he'd had 10 years ago, when they hunted the Miller gang into the Badlands. Get a description of the men? Thompson asked. One of them was the man in the duster. The one who drives Hallerhorn's carriage. The other was a big fella with a red beard. Thompson grabbed his gun belt from the hook. That's enough for me. Rip stood up. Hold on, Sam. Thompson ignored him. He checked the loads in his pistol, his movements sharp and certain. It's a crime, Rip. Arson. Destruction of property. Something I can sink my teeth into. It's a setup, Rip said, his voice low. Thompson stopped. He looked at Rip. What did you say? You call him out in front of the whole town. 2 days later, a rancher gets his barn burned down by Hallerhorn's right-hand man. It's too neat. So, we do nothing? Thompson's voice rose. A man asks for help. We tell him it's too neat? We think, Rip said. We send a wire to the marshal in Prescott. We get some men together. We don't go charging out there, just the 2 of us. This is my town, Thompson said, his jaw set. My jurisdiction. I'm not waiting for a marshal to ride 100 miles to do my job for me. Cletus, you go over to the livery, get a fresh horse. We'll meet you there. Hayes looked from Thompson to Rip, then nodded and hurried out of the office. The room was quiet again. He's baiting you, Sam, Rip said. He wants you out of town. Away from witnesses. Then let him be baited. Thompson buckled his gun belt. I've been a lawman for 30 years. I'm not going to start hiding under my desk because a man in a fancy suit tries to spook me. He walked to the door. You don't have to come, he said without turning around. This is on me. Rip watched him go. He looked at the empty desk, the chair the old man had just left. He could stay. He could let Thompson ride out there alone and meet whatever was waiting for him. It was the smart play. He picked up his hat and his Winchester from the corner. Outside the sun was bright. Thompson was already untying his horse from the rail. The town was watching again. From the mercantile porch, from the doorway of the smithy, they saw the sheriff and his deputy getting ready to ride. Rip swung into his saddle. He pulled the Winchester from its scabbard and rested it across his lap. Thompson got on his own horse. He looked over at Rip. He did not say thank you. He just nodded. They rode out of town, Cletus Hayes a few lengths behind them, the dust rising in a cloud at their backs. They headed east, toward the smell of smoke and the place where the trap was set. They rode through country that flattened into dry, cracked earth and skeletal cholla. The sun hammered the crowns of their hats. No one spoke. The only sounds were the plod of hooves and the squeak of leather. Thompson rode stiff in the saddle, his eyes fixed on the horizon, a man marching toward a fight he craved. Cletus Hayes kept his head down, his horse trailing a few yards behind Rip's. Rip watched the landscape. He noted the folds in the hills, the dark shadows of rock formations that offered cover. His eyes swept back and forth, a habit ingrained from years of tracking men who did not want to be found. Something felt wrong. The air was too still. An hour out, a black plume of smoke smudged the sky. "That's it," Hayes said, his voice a croak. "That's my place." They crested a low rise and saw the ranch. It sat in a shallow basin, a collection of low buildings huddled against the immensity of the plain. The barn was a skeleton of charred timbers, still breathing a greasy smoke into the clean air. A dog lay in the dust near the porch, a black shape swarming with flies. Thompson pulled his horse to a halt. He looked at the ruin of the barn, then at the dead dog. The anger on his face hardened into a mask of cold fury. He swung down from his horse. "Stay here," he said to Hayes. He started toward the house, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt. Rip dismounted, pulling the Winchester from its scabbard. "Sam, wait!" The word was barely out of his mouth when he saw it. A flash of light from a rocky outcrop 100 yards to their right, not a reflection. Metal, a rifle barrel catching the sun. "Sam!" Rip yelled. The crack of the rifle shot was sharp, a whip snap that echoed off the hills. Thompson stopped. He looked down at his chest, a quizzical expression on his face. A dark stain bloomed on his shirt front just below the star. He took a step, then another, his legs refusing to hold him. He fell to his knees, then pitched forward into the dust. Rip dove for the cover of a watering trough, dragging the Winchester with him. He levered around into the chamber. Another shot kicked up dirt a foot from his head. He peered over the edge of the trough and saw a puff of white smoke from the rocks. He aimed and fired. The bullet ricocheted off stone with a high whine. He looked for Hayes. The rancher was gone. His horse galloped back the way they had come, a panicked, riderless flight. Rip scanned the rocks again. Nothing moved. He knew how this worked. The shooters were gone, melting back into the landscape. They had done their job. He was alone. He got to his feet and ran to Thompson. He knelt and rolled the old man over. The wound was bad, high in the chest, bubbling red. Thompson's eyes were open, but they struggled to focus. "Rip," he wheezed. A string of bloody saliva ran from the corner of his mouth. "Easy, Sam. Just lie still." Rip looked around, helpless. The ranch was empty. The world was empty. Thompson grabbed Rip's wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. "You were right." "Bait." Each word was a struggle. Don't let him have it, Rip. The town." "I won't," Rip said. His own voice sounded strange to him. Thompson's eyes looked past Rip, up at the empty blue sky. He tried to say something else. A shudder ran through him, and then he was still. The grip on Rip's wrist went slack. Rip stayed kneeling in the dust, the sun beating down on his back. He looked at the dead lawman, the smoking barn, the silent, empty rocks. The ride back was a long walk. Rip led his horse and Thompson's, the body of the old lawman a dead weight in the saddle, wrapped in a blanket from the ranch house. The sun crawled down the sky, painting the rocks in shades of blood and rust. By the time the lights of redemption appeared, a pale moon had risen, thin and sharp as a shard of bone. He came in from the east, the same way he had left. The town was different. Lamps burned in the hotel and the Red Dog Saloon, casting long yellow rectangles onto the street. But the other windows were dark. No one sat on the porches. A quiet had settled over the place that was not the quiet of sleep. It was the quiet of a held breath. 2 men stood in the shadows of the livery stable. They watched him pass and did not move. Another leaned against a post outside the mercantile. He straightened up as Rip approached, his hand near his gun. Rip did not look at him. He kept his eyes on the sheriff's office, his face a mask of trail dust and grim purpose. He stopped in front of the office. He stood for a moment, listening to the silence. The music from the saloon was a tinny, distant sound. He turned to lift Thompson's body from the horse. "Leave him be, Campbell." The voice came from the hotel porch. Bill Hallerhorn stood at the top of the steps, bathed in the light from the lobby. He held a cigar in one hand. His man in the gray duster stood beside him. At the bottom of the steps stood Cletus Hayes, the rancher. Hayes would not meet Rip's eyes. He stared at his own boots. "He belongs in the office," Rip said. His voice was raw from dust and silence. "He belongs with the undertaker," Hallerhorn said. "Arrangements have been made. A proper burial for a man who served his town." Hallerhorn took a slow puff from his cigar, the tip glowing red in the gloom. "A man who was betrayed by his own deputy." Rip's hands fell away from the body. He turned slowly and faced the hotel. He looked at Hallerhorn, then at Hayes. The rancher flinched. "What story did you tell them, Hayes?" Rip asked. Hayes mumbled something into his chest. "Speak up," Hallerhorn said, his voice smooth but edged with steel. "Tell Mr. Campbell what you told the rest of us. How he warned the sheriff it was a trap. How he insisted they ride out anyway, just the 2 of them." Rip looked at the rancher. He saw the fear in the man's eyes. "That's a lie, is it?" Hallerhorn came down the steps. He walked into the middle of the street until he was only a few feet from Rip. "Mr. Hayes rode back here half mad with fear. Said you led the sheriff into a slaughter. Said you took off after the shooter, but not before the sheriff was dead. It seems you wanted that star pretty bad, Campbell. Bad enough to get a good man killed." The door of the blacksmith's shop creaked open. Jebediah stood in the opening, a silhouette against the fireglow of his forge. Henderson watched from the dark porch of the mercantile. The whole town was watching. "There was no shooter to take off after," Rip said, his voice low and flat. "They were gone." "Convenient," Hallerhorn said. He smiled, a cold, empty thing. A bushwhacker who disappears into thin air. A deputy who survives without a scratch. A sheriff's job open for the taking. He took a step closer. "It paints a picture, wouldn't you agree?" Rip said nothing. He watched Hallerhorn's eyes. He had seen eyes like that before. In wolves, in killers. "For the good of the town," Hallerhorn said, raising his voice for the benefit of the silent audience, "for the sake of order, I'm taking temporary charge of law enforcement." He looked at the tin star on Rip's vest. "I'll take that." Rip did not move. The man in the duster took a step forward, his hand inside his coat. "The star stays where it is," Rip said. "Until I find the man who killed him." Hallerhorn's smile vanished. "Your services are no longer required, Campbell." 2 of Hallerhorn's men came from the saloon and walked to Thompson's horse. They began to unwrap the body. Rip's hand tightened into a fist. "Get away from him," Rip said. The men stopped and looked to Hallerhorn. "Take him to the undertaker," Hallerhorn commanded. He turned his back on Rip. "And Campbell?" "I'd be out of town by morning if I were you. Redemption has a new sheriff. And he doesn't care for loose ends." Rip did not leave. He watched Hallerhorn's men carry Thompson's into the undertaker's office. He watched Hallerhorn walk back to the hotel, the man in the duster a step behind him. He watched the lights in the town go out one by one, until only the saloon and the hotel lobby cast a sick yellow glow on the empty street. Then he led the horses to the livery, unsaddled them, and walked back to the sheriff's office. The lock was flimsy. He pushed Thompson's heavy oak desk against the door. He checked the loads in his Winchester, then in his Colt. He lined 6 extra cartridges up on the edge of the desk. The office felt cold, stripped of the old man's presence. The smell of his pipe tobacco was already fading. Rip sat in Thompson's chair. It groaned under his weight. He stared at the dark window, at the reflection of a man wearing a tin star that meant nothing and everything. He was a lawman with no law to enforce but his own. An hour passed. The piano music at the saloon stopped. A door slammed. Then silence. A soft scratching came from the back door, the one that opened onto the alley. Rip picked up his Colt. He moved without a sound. "Who is it?" His voice was a low rasp. "Jebediah." The blacksmith's voice was a deep rumble, muffled by the wood. "Open up." Rip hesitated, then slid the bolt. Jebediah slipped inside, a large man moving with surprising quiet. He carried a covered plate and a dark green bottle. He set them on the corner of the desk, away from the shells. "Figured you hadn't eaten," Jebediah said. He looked at the desk barricading the front door. He looked at the rifle propped against the wall. He nodded, as if that was the answer to a question he had not asked. "You shouldn't have come," Rip said. "Maybe." The blacksmith pulled the cloth off the plate. A thick steak, beans, and a piece of cornbread. "My wife insisted," said a man can't fight on an empty stomach. He uncorked the bottle. Whiskey. He pushed it toward Rip. "Henderson is scared. He's got his mercantile to think of. Silas Croft, he's all in with Hallerhorn. He walks around the saloon like he owns the place. Which, I guess he doesn't anymore." Rip picked up a piece of the steak with his fingers. It was cold. He ate it anyway. "Hallerhorn's men are everywhere," Jebediah went on, his voice low. "Two watching the livery. One on the hotel porch. One across from here, in the shadows of the assay office." "I saw him," Rip said. "He won't let you stay here, Rip. This office, it's a symbol. As long as you're in it, wearing that star he's holding complete. He'll come for you. Let him." Jebediah ran a hand over his bald head. "This ain't a fair fight. It's you against a dozen men, maybe more. He's got money. He buys loyalty." The blacksmith leaned forward, his big hands flat on the desk. "I got a cellar under the forge. Stone walls. One way in. You could lay low there. Bide your time." Rip shook his head. He looked at the empty peg on the wall where Thompson used to hang his gun belt. "Sam didn't run. Sam's dead." The words were hard, but not unkind. "He died for this town," Rip said. "For this office, for that star. I run, it all means nothing." Jebediah looked at him for a long time. He saw the set of Rip's jaw, the look in his eyes. He picked up the cork and pushed it back into the whiskey bottle. "All right then." He stood up to leave. "You watch your back, Rip. There ain't many others who will." He slipped out the back door as quietly as he came. Rip was alone again. He finished the steak and the beans. He took a long pull from the whiskey bottle. The liquor burned a trail down his throat, but did nothing to warm the cold inside him. He walked to the window and looked out. Across the street, a figure detached itself from the shadows of the assay office. It was the man in the gray duster. He walked to the middle of the street and stopped. He stood there, looking at the sheriff's office, a statue in the moonlight. He did not move. He just watched. The moon climbed. The man in the duster did not move. Rip finished the whiskey and placed the empty bottle on the desk. He dragged Thompson's old wool blanket from the cot in the back room and draped it over the chair, arranging it to look like a man asleep with his head on his arms. He left the lamp burning low. It cast long, dancing shadows that made the ruse seem real enough from a distance. He pulled back the worn rug in front of the fireplace. The floorboards beneath were pine, warped with age. One was loose. He worked his fingers into the crack and lifted. Cool, musty air rose from the opening, a crawl space. He remembered Thompson complaining about the draft in winter. He slipped through the opening, his Winchester in one hand, and pulled the board back into place. The darkness was absolute, thick with the smell of damp earth and spiders. He moved on his hands and knees, the dirt cold and gritty under his palms. He felt his way along the stone foundation until he found the lattice vent on the far side of the building, the one that faced away from the street and the watcher. The wood was rotten. He pushed, and a section crumbled outward into the alley with a soft crunch of decay. He waited, listened. Nothing. He slid out, a snake leaving its skin, and rose into the shadows. The air was cool on his face. The livery was a block down. Two of Hallerhorn's men sat on a bench near the wide front doors, their faces lit by the occasional glow of a shared cigarette. Rip circled around, keeping to the deepest shadows behind the buildings. He found a stack of empty crates behind the mercantile. He picked up a loose stone, hefted it, and threw it hard. It sailed over the roof of the assay office and clattered onto the metal awning of the gunsmith shop at the far end of town. The sound was loud in the silence. The two men at the livery stood up alert. One of them drew his pistol. "Go check it out," one of them said, his voice a nervous whisper. The other man grumbled but started walking toward the noise, sticking to the middle of the street. Rip did not wait for more. He slipped to the back of the livery. A small corral gate was held by a simple wooden latch. He lifted it and stepped inside. The horses shifted in the dark, their warm smell filling the air. He found his buckskin by touch, its coat familiar under his hand. He led it from the corral, his saddle and gear already on its back. He did not bother with a bridle, just a rope halter, looping the lead around the horse's nose. He led it out the back, away from the town, walking it 100 yards before he swung into the saddle. He did not ride to the Hayes Ranch. He circled wide, a mile out, coming at it from the north downwind. The moon gave enough light to see. He dismounted short of the rise and approached on foot, the Winchester in his hands. The smell of cold smoke was still on the air. He went not to the house but to the rocky outcrop where the shot had come from. He moved slow, his eyes on the ground, reading the story left in the dust. He found the shooter's spot, a small cleared area behind a slab of granite that gave a perfect view of the ranch yard. He saw the boot prints. A man of average weight wearing worn-down heels. He saw where the rifle's bipod had rested, 2 small indentations in the dirt. Then he found it. A glint of brass half hidden under a scrubby bush. A shell casing. He picked it up. It was heavy in his hand, big, not a 44-40 from a Winchester. This was a 50-70, a government cartridge. The kind used in a Sharps rifle. A buffalo gun. A weapon for a man who killed from a long way off. He pocketed the casing. He followed the boot prints back from the rocks to where the shooter had tied his horse. The tracks were clear in the moonlight. The horse was big, heavy, and its left forehoof had a chip out of the shoe, a small distinctive notch that left a crescent moon in its wake. Rip stood and looked out across the dark plain. The shooter had ridden north, toward the broken hills. He had a direction. He had a trail. Dawn broke gray and cold over the broken hills. The land was a jumble of rock and shadow, a place where the sun did not warm, it only baked. Rip rode slow, his eyes on the ground. The trail was hard to read here. The wind scoured the earth clean, and the chipped hoofprint appeared and vanished on the hardpan, a ghost of a track. He found it again in a dry wash, a perfect crescent pressed into a patch of damp sand. The man he followed was not trying to hide his trail, not yet. He was confident. He rode a straight line north, deeper into the maze of canyons. By midday, the heat was a physical weight. Rip's buckskin shifted under him, its muscles bunched and tight. The horse knew this was bad country. Rip saw a thin curl of smoke rising from a cluster of boulders ahead. He dismounted, tied his horse to a stunted juniper, and went forward on foot, the Winchester held low in his right hand. An old man sat by a small fire, turning a skinned rabbit on a spit. His clothes were rags held together by dirt and hope. A mule with ribs showing stood nearby, its panniers half full of rocks. A prospector. The old man saw him coming. He did not reach for the ancient shotgun leaning against the rock behind him. He just watched, his eyes a pale, washed-out blue and a face like a dried riverbed. "You're making a lot of noise for a man walking," the prospector said. His voice was a dry rattle. Rip stopped 20 feet away. "Looking for a man? Ain't we all?" The old man squinted at the star on Rip's chest. "You're a long way from any town that needs a lawman. Man I'm after came through here. Big horse, shod with a chip in the left fore." The prospector spat a brown stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Rode past an hour ago. Didn't stop. He was carrying a Sharps. The kind that can reach out and touch you from the next county. You know him?" "Never seen his face. But a man with that rifle, on that horse, in these hills, it ain't a social call." He looked Rip up and down. "You got the look of a man who knows he's being led." Rip's gaze sharpened. "What makes you say that?" "He ain't trying to lose you. He's pulling you along. I saw his tracks. He's picking the easy path, leaving sign a child could follow." The old man poked the rabbit with a stick. "There's only one man I know of who hunts like that. Calls himself Jedstone. Used to hunt buffalo, back when there were any. Now he hunts other things." "Jedstone," Rip said. The name fit the man. Hard. Simple. "He'll take you into a box canyon or up on a high ridge where you re-skylined," the prospector said. "Then he'll lay up with that big rifle and wait for you to make a mistake. He's patient." Rip nodded. He turned to go. "Lawman," the old man called out. Rip stopped. You find what you're looking for, shoot first. Stone don't take prisoners. Rip walked back to his horse. He mounted up and followed the trail. The prospector was right. The tracks were clearer now. A hoof print here that could have been avoided. A broken twig on a greasewood bush that should have been left untouched. Stone was leaving a trail of breadcrumbs. He rode into a narrow canyon. The walls rose up on either side, sheer faces of red rock. The trail went straight down the middle. It was a perfect shooting gallery. The only way out was forward or back. Rip stopped his horse. He looked at the canyon walls, at the shadows that clung to the high ledges. Stone was up there, watching, waiting. He had followed the prey to the slaughterhouse. He looked at the tracks leading deeper into the canyon. They were an invitation, a dare. He knew it was a trap. Stone knew he knew. That was the point. It was not just a killing. It was a game. Rip dismounted. He took his rifle and a canteen. He slapped his horse on the rump, sending it trotting back the way they had come, a decoy for the man on the ridge. Then he turned and walked into the canyon, into the trap, his boots making no sound on the sandy floor. The canyon floor was a river of bleached sand and smooth stones. Rip walked down the center of it, his boots sinking a little with each step. The sun beat on the back of his neck. The rock walls threw the heat back at him. It was a furnace. He kept his eyes on the rimrock, scanning the ledges, the dark fissures, the places a man could hide. Nothing moved. Not a lizard on a rock. Not a hawk in the sky. The shot came without a sound. It was just a sudden violence, a puff of red dust from a boulder 10 feet to his left. The crack of the rifle arrived a second later, a flat, hard sound that echoed off the stone. Rip did not dive. He did not run. He turned his body and slid behind the boulder, the stone warm against his back. He took a long, slow breath. The shot was not meant to kill. It was a bell tolling. I am here. You are mine. He peered around the edge of the rock. He saw the place the shot came from. A small plume of white smoke, already dissolving in the heat haze, high up on the eastern wall. A natural sniper's nest, a dark cleft in the rock maybe 200 yards up. Stone had the high ground. He had the better rifle. He had the patience of the spider. Rip looked at the opposite wall, the western face. It was a jumble of fallen rock and scree at the bottom, leading up to a series of stepped ledges. A hard climb. An exposed climb, but it was a way up. He broke from cover. He did not run in a straight line. He moved in a low crouch, a broken field run, angling for the base of the western wall. He expected another shot. It did not come. Stone was watching. He was letting him go. He wanted to see what the rabbit would do. Rip reached the rockslide. The stones shifted under his boots, a small avalanche of pebbles. He started to climb. He used his hands, finding holds in the rough granite. He wedged his boots into cracks. It was not a climb for a man in a hurry. He tested each hold. He pulled himself up, foot by foot. The sun was relentless. Sweat ran into his eyes, stinging. His shirt was a wet rag on his back. He kept moving. Up. Another shot. This one was closer. A whining ricochet off the rock face a foot from his head. A spray of stone chips stung his cheek. He froze, pressed flat against the rock. He heard the bullet sing its song as it flew down the canyon. You're climbing the wrong tree, lawman. The voice came from the opposite wall, thin and stretched by the distance. Rip looked up. He was 20 feet from the first ledge. He ignored the voice. He found a new handhold and pulled. His muscles screamed. The Winchester, slung on his back, felt like it weighed a ton. He reached the ledge. It was narrow, barely 2 feet wide, but it was solid. He rolled onto it, gasping for air, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had cover. He was out of the shooting gallery. He crawled along the ledge, staying low. It led to a chimney, a vertical crack in the rock wide enough for a man to squeeze into. He looked across the canyon. He could not see Stone, just the dark hole he was hiding in. You should have stayed on the ground, the voice called again. I would have made it quick. Rip pulled himself into the chimney. He braced his back against one side and his feet against the other. He began to inch his way up. It was slow, brutal work. He was blind in the narrow space, seeing only the strip of blue sky above him. He climbed for what felt like an hour. His arms and legs were numb with effort. The sky grew wider. He was near the top. He pulled himself over the final lip of rock and lay flat on a wide, sun-baked mesa. He was on the same level as Jed Stone. The game had changed. He unslung his Winchester. He worked the lever. chambering around. The click was the only sound in the vast, hot silence. The mesa was not flat. It was a broken world of rock, a stone garden full of gullies that could hide a man in boulders big as a homesteader's cabin. The sun hammered the ground and the air shimmered. Rip lay still, his cheek pressed to the hot stone. He did not move for 10 minutes. He listened. The wind sighed across the rock, a low, lonely sound. Nothing else. He pushed up slowly, a half-inch at a time, and surveyed the ground between his position and the sniper's nest across the canyon as void. 200 yards. An impossible shot for a Winchester. An easy one for a Sharps, but the nest was empty. A dark mouth in the rock showing nothing. Stone was gone. He had given up the high ground when Rip made the climb. The game had moved. Rip rose into a low crouch and started forward. He moved from rock to rock, a gray ghost against the gray stone. He did not follow a straight line. He followed the path that offered the most cover. He came to a dry wash that snaked across the mesa and dropped into it. The sand was deep and soft, muffling his steps. He found Stone's trail where the wash deepened. Boot prints. The same worn-down heels. Stone had come this way. He was heading inland, away from the canyon rim. He was leading Rip again. Rip followed. The wash twisted, its walls growing higher. He turned a sharp corner and stopped. A dead coyote lay in the sand. It was fresh, no bloat. No smell yet, its eyes were open, staring at the sun. A single, neat hole was drilled through its ribcage, a warning. A signpost. I am ahead. I am watching. Rip looked up. The walls of the wash were steep here. He was in another trench. He left the coyote and kept moving, his Winchester ready, the stock tight against his shoulder. He walked with his back against the left wall, giving himself a clear view of the path ahead and the rim above on the right. You're a persistent bastard, lawman. The voice echoed in the wash. It came from ahead, but the rock walls played tricks with the sound. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. Rip did not answer. He kept walking. Hallerhorn pays well, the voice called. He would have paid you too, an easy life. All you had to do was look the other way. Rip saw a place where the wash split. 2 paths. He stopped. He looked at the tracks. Stone had gone right. The tracks were deep, clear. Too clear. He took the left path. Wrong choice. The voice was closer now. The wash ended abruptly in a box canyon, a small bowl of sheer rock, a dead end. Rip swore under his breath. He had been hurted. He turned, bringing the Winchester up, ready to fight his way back out. He saw Stone. He stood on the rim of the wash where the 2 paths had split. He was a black silhouette against the bright sky, the long barrel of the Sharps resting in the crook of his arm. He was not aiming. He was watching, smiling. See? Stone said, you think you're smart. You think you're a hunter. You're just a dumb animal, following the scent I leave for you. Rip raised the Winchester. He fired. The shot was an instinct. The bullet chipped rock a yard to Stone's left. Stone did not flinch. He just laughed, a dry, humorless sound. My turn, Stone said. He brought the Sharps to his shoulder. Rip did not wait for the shot. He dove to his right, behind a pile of fallen rock at the base of the canyon wall. The Sharps boomed, a deep-throated roar that shook the air. The bullet hit the spot where Rip had been standing. It did not whine or ricochet. It hit the sand with the flat, heavy thud of a blacksmith's hammer. It left a crater the size of a fist. Rip was pinned. Stone had him in a kill box. The game was over. All that was left was the killing. The rock Rip hid behind was not a single boulder. It was a pile of shale and granite, a crumble of stone that had fallen from the canyon wall years ago. Dust filled the spaces between the rocks. A small, tough bush grew from a crack, its leaves a dusty green. Rip pressed his body into the narrow space, making himself small. Another shot from the Sharps. It struck the top of the rock pile, shattering a slab of granite. Shards of stone rained down, one slicing a thin line across the back of Rip's hand. He ignored the sting. He watched the blood well up, a single dark red drop. You can't stay in that hole forever, lawman. Stone's voice floated down, calm and certain. Sun's going to move. That shadow you're hiding in will be gone in an hour. Rip looked at the sun. Stone was right. The shadow was shrinking. He was a man hiding behind a melting block of ice. He studied the rock face above Stone's position. It was fractured, full of deep cracks. A spiderweb of lines etched by time and weather. It looked unstable. An idea, sharp and dangerous, formed in his mind. It was a fool's chance. It was the only one he had. He pushed the barrel of the Winchester through a gap in the rocks. He was not aiming at the man on the rim, he was aiming higher. At the wall of stone 50 feet above Stone's head. "Last chance," Stone called. "Come on out. I'll make it clean." Rip did not answer. He took a breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. The Winchester bucked against his shoulder. The report was sharp, almost thin compared to the boom of the sharps. He saw the bullet strike the cliff face, a small puff of dust. He levered another round into the chamber and fired again, and again. He emptied the rifle, placing each shot in the same small area, a tight pattern on the fractured rock. For a moment, nothing happened. Stone laughed. A single sharp bark of amusement. "You trying to shoot the mountain down, lawman? You've lost your nerve." Then came a sound. A low groan from deep within the rock. A single pebble skittered down the cliff face. Then another. A crack appeared, widening like a bolt of black lightning. Stone stopped laughing. He looked up. The groaning became a roar. A section of the cliff face, a slab of rock the size of a freight wagon, peeled away from the mountain. It did not fall. It slid, grinding stone on stone, pushing a cascade of smaller rocks and dirt ahead of it. Stone was no longer a silhouette. He was a man, small and suddenly desperate. He turned to run. The rockslide caught him. He disappeared in a cloud of red dust and tumbling stone. The sound was deafening, a physical blow that shook the canyon floor. Rip pressed himself against his rock pile as the shockwave hit. The dust was thick, a choking curtain that blotted out the sun. It filled his nose, his throat, his eyes. He stayed down, listening. The roar of the slide faded, replaced by the clatter of falling pebbles. Then silence. He waited. He reloaded the Winchester. The dust began to settle, revealing a changed landscape. The rim of the wash where Stone had stood was gone. A new slope of raw, broken rock angled down into the canyon. Rip rose from his cover. He walked into the cloud, his boots crunching on fresh debris. He saw the sharps first. It was 20 feet down the slope, half buried, its long barrel bent at a sharp angle. Its stock was splintered. He followed a trail of scuffed rock and disturbed dirt. He found Stone at the bottom of the slide. He was alive. He lay on his back, his right leg twisted at an unnatural angle beneath a heavy slab of granite. His face was a mask of dust and blood. Rip stood over him. He looked at the man who had hunted him, the man who had played him like a fish on a line. Stone's eyes fluttered open. They were filled with surprise and a deep, burning hate. "You broke the rules," Stone rasped, his voice a dry whisper. "You made the rules," Rip said. He knelt and began to work the rock off Stone's leg. The rock was heavy. Rip braced his boots against the loose scree and put his shoulders into it. The granite slab scraped against other stones, a raw, grating sound. It moved an inch. Stone did not make a sound, but his body went rigid. His knuckles were white where he gripped the dirt. Rip heaved again. The rock shifted, then tilted. It slid free with a low rumble. Stone's leg was a ruin. The pant leg was shredded, dark with blood. The bone had pushed through the skin, a jagged white shard in the sun. "Hallerhorn," Rip said. It was not a question. It was a demand. Stone's head lolled to the side. He looked at Rip, his eyes narrowed to slits. A bloody grin split his face. "Go to hell." Rip took his knife from his belt. He cut away the ruined fabric of Stone's pant leg. The wound was a mess of splintered bone, torn muscle, and dirt. "You'll lose the leg," Rip said. "Maybe more. Worry about yourself, lawman." Rip stood up. He walked to the splintered stock of the Sharp's rifle. He picked up 2 long straight pieces of dark walnut. He went back to Stone and knelt. "This is going to hurt," Rip said. He took hold of the leg, one hand on the ankle, the other just below the knee. He pulled. Stone screamed. It was not a yell. It was a high, thin sound, like a rabbit in a trap. The bone slid back into place with a wet, grating noise. Stone's head slammed back against the ground. His eyes rolled up until only the whites showed. He was out. Rip worked fast. He cleaned the wound as best he could with a strip of cloth from his own shirt and water from his canteen. He laid the pieces of the rifle stock on either side of the shattered shin. He took Stone's gun belt and cut it into strips. binding the splint tight. He waited. The sun moved across the sky. The shadows in the canyon deepened. Rip sat on a rock, the Winchester across his lap, and watched the unconscious man. He cleaned his own pistol, reloaded it, and put it back in its holster. Stone woke up with a gasp. He tried to sit up, then fell back with a groan. His eyes found Rip. The hate was still there. It was a fire that the pain could not put out. "Get up," Rip said. "I can't walk." "I didn't say walk." Rip got his horse. He led the animal over to the rockslide. He hauled Stone into a sitting position. Stone was dead weight, his face pale and slick with sweat. "You tell me who paid you, this gets easier," Rip said, his voice low in Stone's ear. "The name's Hallerhorn," Stone breathed, his voice mocking. "Bill Hallerhorn. He's a respected businessman. New in town." Rip ignored him. He put his hands under Stone's arms and lifted. It was a clumsy, brutal struggle. Stone cried out as his splinted leg banged against a rock. Rip got him draped over the saddle, face down like a sack of feed. He tied Stone's hands to the stirrups, and his good foot to the other. He started the long walk out of the canyon, leading the horse. The sun was low, throwing long, distorted shadows ahead of them. "You're a dead man, Campbell," Stone mumbled from the saddle. "You just don't know it yet. He owns that town now. He owns the law." "The law's right here," Rip said, not looking back. They made camp when the sky was a deep, star-littered purple. Rip pulled Stone from the horse and propped him against a boulder. He built a small fire, just enough to make coffee and keep the chill away. He gave Stone a canteen of water. "You're not going to make it back," Stone said, his voice stronger now. "You are," Rip said. He sat on the other side of the fire, the Winchester in his hands. He watched the prisoner, his eyes never leaving the man who held the key to Sam Thompson's death. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks into the vast dark silence. The dawn was a cold gray line on the horizon. Rip kicked dirt over the last of the fire's embers. He gave Stone the last of the coffee, watching the man drink it in greedy gulps. Stone's leg was swollen, the skin around the splint a dark, angry purple. Fever shone in his eyes. "You should have left me," Stone said. His voice was a dry rasp. "I need you to talk," Rip said. "I've said all I'm going to. Getting him on the horse was worse than the day before." Stone passed out twice. Rip tied him in place and started walking. The land flattened out into a wide, sun-baked plain dotted with mesquite and yucca. The mountains were a blue smudge at his back. Redemption was 2 days' walk, maybe less on a horse. Rip saw the tracks around noon. They were unshod ponies. 6 or 7 of them, moving at a steady pace, heading south, Apaches. He stopped, scanning the horizon. Nothing, just the heat haze dancing off the hardpan. He checked his Winchester, then his Colt. He kept walking, his eyes no longer on the ground but on the folds of the land, the shadows that did not look right. They came an hour later. They did not ride down on him with whoops and yells. They were just suddenly there. One moment, the plain was empty. The next, 7 riders sat on their ponies 100 yards away, watching him. They were lean men, their skin the color of worn leather. They carried rifles across their laps. One held a lance with a single eagle feather tied to its tip. Rip stopped. He rested his hand on the butt of his pistol but did not draw it. The horse shifted nervously behind him. The Apaches did not move. They sat and watched, their faces impassive, a silent judgment. "Just ride on by," Stone whispered from the saddle. "They don't want us. They want the horse," Rip said. "And the rifles." The rider with the lance kneed his pony forward. He stopped 10 feet from Rip. His face was scarred, one eye a milky white. He looked at Rip, then at the man tied to the saddle. He pointed a chin at Stone. "He is your enemy?" the Apache asked. His voice was rough, the words clipped. "He's my prisoner," Rip said. The Apache looked at Stone's splinted leg. He looked at the Sharp's rifle, its stock shattered, tied to the saddlebags. He grunted. A sound of contempt. He looked back at Rip. "We take the horse. The guns. You walk." It was a better offer than Rip expected. He would live. He would go back to redemption with nothing but his word. Hallerhorn would win. "The prisoner comes with me," Rip said. The Apache's good eye narrowed. "He's a cripple. He will die in the sun. He stands trial for murder." The Apache looked at Stone again. A flicker of something, maybe understanding, crossed his face. He shook his head. "The horse." Rip stood his ground. He could feel the eyes of the other 6 warriors on him. He was a dead man negotiating the terms of his own burial. He never saw Stone move. He heard a grunt, a sudden surge of movement from the horse. Stone had worked one hand free from the stirrup. In it, he held a knife. A small skinning knife Rip had not seen, pulled from a boot. Stone did not go for Rip. He twisted in the saddle, the ropes cutting into him, and launched himself at the Apache leader. It was not an attack. It was a final act of defiance. He plunged the knife into the pony's neck. The horse screamed and reared. The Apache fought to control his mount. Stone, tangled in his ropes, fell from the saddle and landed hard on his shattered leg. He screamed, a sound of pure agony. The world exploded. A rifle cracked from the line of warriors. The bullet hit Stone in the chest, throwing him back against the dirt. Another shot, then a third. The other Apaches charged, their faces transformed into masks of rage. Rip drew and fired in the same motion. He shot the rider closest to him. The man threw his arms wide and tumbled from his pony. Rip dove for cover behind his own horse as a bullet whistled past his ear. He fired again, under the horse's neck. Another warrior grunted and fell. The Apache leader got his panicked horse under control. He saw his men fall. He saw Rip, using the horse for a shield. He saw Stone, dead in the dust. He raised his lance, his face a storm of fury, and charged. Rip shot the horse. The animal went down in a heap, trapping the warrior's leg. Rip did not wait. He turned and ran. He ran as the remaining Apaches cut their fallen leader free. He ran as they took the guns, the horses, and scalped the dead man in the dirt. He ran and did not look back. The sun was a hammer. Rip walked with his head down, watching his boots kick up puffs of dust. He followed the wagon ruts because it was easier than thinking, one foot the other. He had walked for 2 days. His canteen was empty. His lips were cracked. The world had shrunk to the next step. He smelled wood smoke. He looked up. Redemption sat in the heat shimmer a mile away. It did not look right. A new building stood half-finished at the edge of town, its raw pine skeleton stark against the blue sky. He had been gone a week. It felt like a year. He walked down the middle of the main street. The town was quiet, but it was not the quiet of a Sunday morning. It was the quiet of a held breath. Men watched him from the shadows of awnings. They were not the men he knew. They were hard-faced strangers with guns on their hips, men who looked like they belonged in a trail in town, not here. They watched him pass, their eyes cold and flat. Henderson's Mercantile was closed. A new sign hung over the door of the Red Dog Saloon, black with gold lettering. The Gilded Cage. He saw Silas Croft sweeping the porch. Silas saw him, and for a moment, his eyes widened. Then he looked down at his broom and swept faster, as if a great and sudden interest in dust had seized him. Rip kept walking toward the sheriff's office. The door was open. Smoke drifted out into the sunlight, lazy and blue. It smelled of expensive cigars. He stepped inside. Bill Hallerhorn sat in Sam Thompson's chair. His feet, in their polished boots, rested on the corner of the desk. He held a lit cigar in one hand. The red-bearded man and the driver in the gray duster stood against the back wall, their arms crossed. "Well," Hallerhorn said, taking the cigar from his mouth. "Look what the desert coughed up. We were just about to send a search party." Rip's eyes went from Hallerhorn to the empty hook where Sam's gun belt used to hang. He looked at the clean desk, the neat stack of papers. It was Sam's office, but it was not Sam's place anymore. "Get out of the chair," Rip said. His voice was a dry croak. Hallerhorn smiled. He did not move. "I'm afraid I can't do that. This is the office of the town administrator, appointed by a committee of concerned citizens for the public good." "Where is he?" Rip asked. "Your prisoner?" Hallerhorn blew a smoke ring. It floated toward the ceiling and broke apart. "That's the question on everyone's mind. You ride out with a man in irons. You come back alone on foot. It looks bad, Rip. It looks like you had something to hide." "Stone's dead," Rip said. Apaches, Hallerhorn said, as if tasting the word. "Convenient. Did they happen to take the man's confession before they killed him?" "A signed document, perhaps." The red-bearded man chuckled. "He confessed," Rip said. "He told me who paid him to kill Sam Thompson." Hallerhorn's smile did not waver. He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. "Let me tell you what I think happened. I think you and this man Stone were partners. I think you killed Sheriff Thompson because you wanted his job. It's a respectable position. A man with your history could use a bit of respectability. But you argued over the split, so you killed him too. Silenced him for good. Rip stood in the middle of the room. He could feel the eyes of the two men on him. He could feel the weight of the lie settling over the town. That star on your chest, Hallerhorn said, pointing with his cigar. Where is it? Rip looked down at his vest. The tin star was gone. He had not even noticed. Lost somewhere in the canyon or on the long walk home. You have no authority here, Campbell, Hallerhorn said, his voice turning hard. You have no prisoner. You have no proof. All you have is a story, and I have a town. He stood up. He walked around the desk until he was standing in front of Rip. He was shorter, but he held himself like a man who cast a long shadow. Here are your choices. You can get on a horse and ride out of redemption. Disappear, or you can stay. If you stay, I'll have you arrested for murder. You'll get a trial, a jury of your peers. And then we'll hang you. He reached into his coat and pulled out a wallet. He took out a gold eagle and held it between his thumb and forefinger. For the horse, Hallerhorn said. Consider it a severance. He tried to press the coin into Rip's hand. Rip did not move. His hand did not open. The coin fell to the floor. It spun, a flash of gold on the dusty floorboards, and then lay still. Rip looked at Hallerhorn. He saw the certainty in the man's eyes. He had won. He had played the game and won. Rip turned and walked out of the office. He stepped into the street. The sun was blinding. The town was waiting. Rip walked to the horse trough in the center of the street. He bent and scooped water into his hands. It was warm and tasted of dust, but it was wet. He drank, then splashed his face, the water tracing clean paths through the grime on his skin. He looked at his reflection in the surface. A stranger looked back. He walked to the mercantile. The door was locked. Through the window, he could see Henderson behind the counter, arranging cans of beans into a perfect pyramid. Rip knocked on the glass. Henderson jumped. He looked at Rip, then looked over his shoulder toward the street. He shook his head, a quick, fearful motion. He would not come to the door. Rip's stomach was a tight, empty knot. He needed food. He needed cartridges for his Colt. He had nothing. The gold coin lay in the dust in front of the sheriff's office. He turned from the mercantile and walked toward the livery. Maybe he could find work, muck out some stalls for a meal. The livery doors were open, the interior dark and smelling of hay and horse. Barnes? Rip called out. A man appeared from the shadows. It was not Barnes. It was one of Hallerhorn's men, a lanky kid with a vacant face and a pistol tied low on his hip. Barnes sold the place, the kid said. Left town yesterday. Something about his health. I'm looking for work, Rip said. The kid grinned, a slow, stupid grin. The town administrator is hiring. You should go see him. He patted the butt of his gun. I hear he's got a special job for you. Rip turned and walked away. Every door was close to him. Every face was a stranger's or a coward's. He had protected these people. He had stood between them and the kind of men who now watched him from every shadow. They had forgotten, or they were too scared to remember. He walked past the smithy. The sound of a hammer on steel rang out, a steady, defiant rhythm. It was the only honest sound in town. He stopped. He pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside. The heat from the forge hit him like a wall. Jebediah, the blacksmith, stood at the anvil, his face slick with sweat, his bare arms corded with muscle. He held a glowing piece of iron with a pair of tongs, shaping it with powerful, measured blows. He finished the piece, a hinge for a gate, and plunged it into the slack tub. Steam hissed and boiled. Jebediah turned. He looked at Rip, his expression unreadable. He was a big man, broad as a draft horse, with a calm that few men could shake. Heard you were back, Jebediah said. His voice was a low rumble. Heard you were dead, he added. Not yet. Rip leaned against the doorframe. The heat felt good on his trail-chilled bones. Hallerhorn runs things now. He signs the paychecks, Jebediah said. That don't mean he runs things. He picked up another piece of iron with his tongs and thrust it into the glowing heart of the forge. Henderson won't sell you bullets. The livery won't give you a horse. The hotel won't give you a room. What are you going to do, Rip? Leave, Rip said. The word tasted like ash. Not much else I can do. Jebediah pulled the iron from the fire. It glowed a bright, angry orange. He laid it on the anvil and began to hammer. The ringing filled the small space. Each blow a declaration. Clang. Sam Thompson was my friend. Clang. He gave you that star. Clang. You think he'd want you to run? He stopped. The silence was heavy. He looked at Rip, his eyes clear and direct in the firelight. A man who runs keeps running, the blacksmith said. A man who stays gets hanged. Maybe, Jebediah said. He'd put the iron back in the fire. Or maybe he fights. Maybe he reminds folks what this town is supposed to be. He nodded toward a small door in the back of the smithy. There's a cot back there. Some bread and cheese on the table. Eat. Sleep. No one will look for you here. Rip looked at the big man. He saw no fear in his eyes, only resolve. Why? Rip asked. Because this is my town, Jebediah said, his voice hard. And I don't like the new landlord. He turned back to the forge, his broad back like a wall of defiance. Rip woke to the smell of coal smoke and hot iron. He was on a cot in a small windowless room behind the forge. A plate with a half-eaten loaf of bread and a wedge of cheese sat on a crate beside him. He finished it, washing it down with water from a tin cup. The food and the sleep had cleared his head. The thought of leaving was gone. He found Jebediah at the anvil, working a piece of steel with slow, rhythmic taps. The smith did not look up. Morning, Jebediah said. He's got men watching the street, Rip said. 2 on the hotel porch, 1 in the livery. At least 4 in the saloon. I counted 8 in total, Jebediah said. Not counting Hallerhorn. He placed his hammer on the anvil. 2 men against 8. And a town full of ghosts. We need the ghosts, Rip said. We need Silas Croft, Jebediah grunted. Silas is a rabbit. He'll run the second he smells a hawk. A rabbit in a cage will chew its own leg off to get free, Rip said. Hallerhorn has him in a cage. We just need to show him the door. They waited for night. The moon was a sliver, offering little light. The town was dark except for the yellow glow from the windows of the gilded cage. The piano music sounded brittle and forced. Rip and Jebediah slipped out the back of the smithy, moving through the alley that ran behind the main street buildings. The air was cool and smelled of trash and stale beer. They stopped behind the saloon. A single lamp burned in a second-floor window. That's Silas's office, Rip whispered. He locks the back door, Jebediah said. But the cellar grate is another story. He knelt and worked his thick fingers under the edge of a heavy iron grate set into the dirt. With a low groan of protesting metal, he lifted it free. They dropped into the cellar. It was cool and damp, smelling of earth and soured whiskey. They moved through the darkness, their hands brushing against barrels and crates, until they found the stairs. At the top, a sliver of light showed under the door. Rip listened. Nothing. He lifted the bar and pushed the door open. They were in a storeroom behind the bar. They could hear the low murmur of the last few patrons out front. They waited. 10 minutes later, they heard the front doors close and the heavy bar fall into place. Footsteps shuffled upstairs. Then, the sound of a man coming back down. Silas Croft entered the storeroom, holding a lamp. He was going over his receipts. He saw them and his face went slack with terror. The lamp trembled in his hand, throwing wild shadows on the walls. He opened his mouth to shout. Jebediah crossed the room in 2 strides and put a hand over Silas's mouth. Make a sound and I'll snap your neck, the blacksmith whispered. Rip stepped forward into the lamplight. We're not here to hurt you, Silas. Jebediah took his hand away. Silas backed against a shelf of whiskey bottles, his eyes wide. They'll kill me. Hallerhorn's men are right upstairs. They work for a paycheck, Rip said. What happens when the money's gone? He has a safe in his hotel room, Silas stammered. He pays them every Saturday. Tomorrow, Rip said. Where does he get the cash? Silas wiped a sweaty palm on his apron. He looked toward the ceiling. It comes in on the morning stage, a lockbox. The driver, the man in the duster, picks it up. Brings it right to the saloon. He swallowed hard. Hallerhorn meets with a man from the railroad here. In his office, my office. He says it's more private than the hotel. So the money for the whole week sits in your office until Hallerhorn pays his men, Rip said. Silas nodded, misery on his face. He counts it on my desk, like he owns the place. Like he owns me. We're going to get it back, Rip said. How? Silas whispered. His men are everywhere. Not everywhere, Jebediah rumbled. They're lazy. They drink his whiskey. They sit on porches. They don't expect a fight. The stage gets in at 9, Rip said. The driver brings the box here. We take it, We take it and we give the town a choice. Hallerhorn's promises or their own money back. He looked at Silas. We need a diversion. Something to pull his men away from the saloon for 5 minutes. A look of cunning crept into Silas's fearful eyes. The new hotel wing, Hallerhorn is proud of it, all that green lumber. An hour later, Rip stood in the shadows across from the mercantile. Jebediah had gone back to the smithy. Rip watched the front of the store for a long time. Finally, he saw a flicker of movement. The back door opened a crack. A canvas sack thumped softly on the ground. The door closed. Rip darted across the alley and grabbed the bag. Inside, he felt the familiar weight of cartridge boxes and the oily slickness of a cleaned and loaded Colt Peacemaker. Henderson's answer. Rip faded back into the darkness. He had a gun. He had a plan. The town was asleep, but it was not beaten. The sun would be up in a few hours. The sun climbed, baking the dust on the street. It was 10 minutes to 9. Rip stood in the deep shadow of the alley between the saloon and the mercantile. He had the Colt tucked in his belt. It felt heavy, right. From the other end of town, a column of thick black smoke began to rise. It billowed up from behind the hotel, greasy and foul. A moment later, a man shouted, "Fire!" The 2 men on the hotel porch stood up. They looked at the smoke, then at each other. One of them ran inside. The other stayed, his hand on his gun, his eyes scanning the street. The men from the livery and the saloon spilled out, drawn by the shout. They clustered for a moment, confused. Hallerhorn appeared on the hotel balcony. He pointed a finger toward the smoke. "Go, put it out." His men broke and ran, a disorganized pack heading for the new hotel wing, all except one. The driver, the man in the gray duster, stayed put. He looked up and down the street, his face a mask of suspicion. The stagecoach came then, pulled by 4 tired horses. It rattled to a stop in front of the saloon. The driver tossed a heavy lockbox down to Hallerhorn's man. The man caught it, turned, and walked toward the saloon doors. Rip stepped out of the alley. "That's far enough," Rip said. The man in the duster stopped. He did not seem surprised. He turned slowly, the lockbox held in both hands. "Campbell, I heard you came back to get hanged." "I came back for the town's money," Rip said. The man smiled, a thin, bloodless expression. "This is Mr. Hallerhorn's money. He pays my wages with it. He paid you to burn Cletus Hayes' barn. Paid you to kill Sam Thompson." The man's eyes flickered. "You got no proof of that." "The proof is in that box," Rip said. "Drop it." From the doorway of the smithy, Jebediah appeared. He held a 14-pound sledgehammer. It rested on his shoulder like it weighed nothing. He did not say a word. He just stood there, a mountain of iron and muscle blocking the street. The man in the duster looked from Rip to Jebediah. He licked his lips. He was calculating, his hand moved an inch toward his pistol. "Don't," Rip said. The saloon doors swung open. Silas Croft stood there, holding a double-barreled shotgun. His hands trembled, but he held it level. The man in the duster looked at Silas. He laughed, a short, sharp bark. "You too, Silas?" "It's my saloon," Silas said, his voice a squeak. The lockbox hit the dirt with a heavy thud. The man in the duster raised his hands. "Take it," he said. From the hotel, Hallerhorn's voice cut through the air. "What is the meaning of this?" He strode toward them, his face a storm cloud. His other men were still at the fire, confused by the lack of flames and the surplus of smoke. Hallerhorn stopped 20 feet from Rip. His eyes were chips of ice. "Campbell, you are a thief. You are stealing my property in front of the whole town." People were coming out of their shops. Henderson stood on the mercantile porch. A few others peered from doorways. Rip did not look at Hallerhorn. He looked at the townspeople. "This is your money," Rip said, his voice clear and loud. "This is the money he took when he bought your freight office for pennies. When he bought your livery for a threat, he nudged the box with his boot. He was going to pay these men to keep their boots on your necks. I say you pay yourselves back." Jebediah stepped forward. He swung the sledgehammer. The lock shattered, the lid of the box flying open. It was full of cash. Greenbacks and gold coins. Hallerhorn's face went white. "I'm the law here." "No," Rip said, turning to face him at last. "You're just a man with a checkbook. And you're overdrawn." Hallerhorn looked at the faces watching him. He saw no fear. He saw contempt. His power had vanished with the breaking of a lock. He looked at Rip, at Jebediah, at Silas. He gave a single, sharp nod. "This is not over," he said. He turned, his back straight, and walked to his black carriage parked in front of the hotel. He got in. The man in the duster, his hands still raised, backed away and climbed into the driver's seat. The carriage rolled down the street and out of town, leaving a trail of dust. Rip looked at the money, then at the people of redemption. He had won. For today. He picked up a single gold coin from the box and tossed it to Jebediah. He still owed him for the bullets,